So my first question for you is that I've often, I'm sure many of us do, think of museums as much as a calling as it is a career. But speaking perhaps for myself, who's been around for a while, it can be easy to forget what brought us here in the first place. So can you tell us what's kind of driven you to your work in naturalist museums? What inspires you, basically? Why are you here? Do you want to start at the end?
Yeah, sure. So I think kind of one of the things that I find interesting about naturalism, natural sciences collections and conservation, heritage conservation would be probably interrelated aims of ecological and heritage conservation. The idea that one can't really exist without the other. The threat to our environment obviously changing, a lot of considerations surrounding conservation of our environment. So I think that's one of the things that ethically kind of draws the two together and I find really interesting. As well as the idea that natural sciences collections are both historical and very contemporary for the same reason. And I think, and this is I think understood within conservation, it's not something passive. You are shaping these narratives and contributing towards what is preserved and how. So I feel like those things kind of tie together really nicely. That's why
Make sure to hold the small mic very close to your mouth when you're talking. Because people online can't hear you.
Like this? Can we
yes,
do like this? Great. Yes. In my mouth. So I was always a kid who was really into animals and nature. And in Ireland, I don't know if it's common in other countries, but in Ireland we have a program when you're about 15 or 16 where you can go and do work experience. So usually it's your parents who go and have a contact that gets you in somewhere, and I was always really into nature and animals and biology and science, but I think my mom very astutely observed that I wasn't the most outdoorsy child, and she happened, because it's Ireland and everyone knows everyone, she happened to know the keeper of natural history at the museum at the time, Nigel Monaghan, so got me in contact with him, sort of shoved me in the door as a very quiet, nervous teenager, and I absolutely loved it and decided to make it my entire personality. But I think what inspires me about museums is it kind of, it's like a collision of both my academic interests and the natural world and the history of exploration and nature, but also I like to have a job that's practical and I like to put order to chaos. I think that's something I enjoy doing, and it's a big part of museums. It's also a sector that's not for profit, it's for education, it's for people, and I can't ever imagine myself working in an area that's about profit. I wouldn't do very well in a corporate world, so being able to work in a museum feels like I'm getting to contribute to society and do something really good for both the planet and for people. I think maybe indirectly. But,
yeah. It is now working on my.
Is it? Yay! Yes. Okay, is this close enough? Great. So mine's going to sound really wishy-washy, but I'm really inspired by the people who've come before me. So like my mom, my nan, my aunt, all the women in my family who. My nan moved from St Kitts in the 50s, so she's brought us up on a lot of her learning. She has raised my mom to be a gardener. My mom is trying absolutely desperately to get me to have a garden, but my plot is about this big. At home in Edinburgh, it's tiny, and that's the natural sort of inspiration. But I think in general, I used to work at a local Black History archive, so I was in very close contact with members of the Windrush generation and members in Leicester who've moved over and remember life back in the region. And I could kind of see the smiles on their faces whenever they would talk about living back home or even just going back and seeing family. And that's something that while I don't have that experience, I do want to be able to champion that and bring that into museum spaces so that people like me who were born in the UK and those after us still have a connection to our roots. And a lot of that is through the natural world. I think you can't get any closer to it than that. And yeah, I think it would be really special to be able to sort of bring what my nan and my mom have brought, maybe not the garden so much, but I think being able to bring that into the museum space and help that representation of Black Caribbean descendants. Bring that into the space would be really powerful.
That didn't sound wishy-washy at all. I think I'm sure like there's a lot all of you said there that will certainly remind me. I'm sure resonate with a lot of people in the room. Yeah, oh yeah, that's what we're here for. So when we've got new people starting in the museum where I work, whenever someone's starting, I was trying to say, please let's use this opportunity to take your fresh eyes and don't just say, okay, I'm going to do it the way you're doing it. Just say, why. What about doing it this way? So this is our home truths question. What strange things have you noticed about the sector so far? If you were the anonymous curator online, what makes you say, why on earth do they do it that way? The steer here is like we're talking about big picture stuff, not like don't land your colleagues in it of like, oh, this guy does this crazy. Yeah. Do you want to start, Kim?
Yeah, I have one cool one. Yes, I have one cool one, and I have a not so cool one. Something that I think is really cool about it's like a strange thing, but it sometimes works, maybe it sometimes doesn't, is how little direct training there is for something that's so skilled. But it means that people come from lots of different backgrounds, and we have so much to learn from each other. For example, in my role, it's, I have a background in zoology and paleontology, which you would think would be super helpful, but sometimes having a colleague, which we do, who comes from like a construction background was way more useful, because in that moment I needed to like lift something really heavy. I didn't need to know what it was. So that's like a really cool thing, but it sometimes is strange that there's no formal training for that. But also, how do you have formal training for something that's so diverse, and where like skills are like the skill set you need can be so diverse? And then another thing that I can find hard about the museum is sometimes the people making decisions. I kind of naively assumed when I started a museum that the people making decisions would be the curators. But it's not always the way. It's often like directors or people higher up. But it can make it, I'm sure like it's really, really important to have people with a more business mindset, but it can be hard when you're a curator and you're being run like a business. Yeah. Rant over.
Yes. I think my big one is labels. So when my archive was starting up, I was able to take full control of like all the information, and I'm such a perfectionist, so I was like, okay, let's just have all the description like just be like fully written out, everything down to like ISADG standards, and let's just follow everything. And then I went into a national museum where there's like 300 years of different labeling practices and like thousands of documents that are like in the backlog. The big thing that I have right now, and it's my massive problem, is in this report that I'm doing for Caribbean collections, they love to just put West Indies, and that's it. And I can't get any closer to where things come from, because the West Indies is a massive, massive region. And in a perfect world, I would have infinite time and I would be able to go through everything and put in all of the work to have everything up to standard, and it'd be perfect, but I won't be able to be alive long enough to do that. So yeah, labels are the big thing, and it's a massive shock. And I think the difference between natural science labeling and then art history, archives, and all sorts, the massive difference between like detail and localities and things like that. I learned that Guyana is treated as South America, when to me it's the Caribbean. So yeah, that was like probably the biggest culture shock, let's say.
I guess this is kind of, you touched on this a little bit, Kim, but I think the idea that museums have very future-facing values, but quite old-fashioned hierarchical structures. And I think from the perspective of conservation, it can feel like we're a little bit low down in that hierarchy in terms of decision-making. But yeah, I think especially as a newcomer, institutions can feel a little bit slow or difficult to navigate. And that can be kind of anything ranging between the informal knowledge of just who to contact about a specific thing. I mean, with collections that are as large as the Natural History Museum in London, there are so many different people who have so many different, stakes in the collection. And, when you're making important decisions about treatment, it's good to be able to have that conversation with someone, and that's not always possible with draws on people's time. So, yeah, I think, I was definitely surprised about how much brilliant work is really kind of built upon these quite informal knowledge, short-term contracts. So loss of knowledge in some of those contexts, and then goodwill as well.
What might you like to be done differently about that?
I mean, maybe like searchable employee directories, that kind of thing. Like, good and searchable employee directories, that might be a good place to start. That are updated regularly. And I suppose kind of when you're starting a project, kind of being immediately kind of in contact with someone again might be useful. And this might also just be a feature of doing an internship, and other people have this knowledge, but I haven't known who to ask. So yeah.
This is my last question for the moment, so do be thinking about what you might want to ask. So this is our kind of the hopes for the future questions. If you three were in 50 years' time, which is terrifying, sat back here as our NatSCA grandees again, or even 10 or 20 years' time, what changes would you like to have seen other than staff directory? What excites you about where we might be going as a sector? Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I'd like to see more marrying between the natural sciences and human collections, like material culture. I think I've been able to see where like natural world sort of meets human life. So things that have been made with natural material that are sort of ethnographic now and somehow divorced from the natural world. So I would like to see some more curators who aren't natural scientists here. I'm sure there are many who come to NatSCA anyway, but it would be nice to see, people from like world culture departments who also come and like very happily engage with sciences, because I think world culture curators tend to think that natural sciences, it's just science, I don't have any need for it. So yeah. Ooh, my hair's attached to the mic, sorry.
Something I think is exciting is, I know we talk about decolonization so much, so it's exciting to see how things are being recontextualized for modern audiences. I know that's something that everyone's working on at the moment, and I think that's like a really great way for museums to be going. I also think there's definitely going to be really cool technologies that will utilize our collections in ways that we're not expecting. Like, I think of things like most of our collections, I'm sure, existed before people even knew what DNA was, and now our collections are used for genetic studies all the time. So I imagine there will be similar things like that in the future that will use our collections in ways that we can't even imagine. That's my really positive one. I also would really like what you touched on, more like full-time positions. I say that selfishly. I'm on a contract, so I'll be finishing up soon, and I know there's so many people in the room who work short contracts, and there's a huge loss of knowledge from when staff stay for contract after contract, and eventually there's nothing left. So it'd be great to see museums value, or those roles valued more. I know the museums themselves value them more, but the people with the money will hopefully be able to keep people on, especially with an increasing biodiversity crisis. There is going to be, hopefully not, but like there is going to be a point where things will only exist in museums. So if we have more staff, hopefully that will be better preserved. So more that if I could make anything happen, it would be more permanent and full-time positions for staff to be able to do more work. We all have really big workloads, so that would be something I would wish into the world. partly selfishly because I won't have a job soon.
Wish that. Do you want to make any wild predictions whilst we're being recorded that in 50 years' time technology will be doing this thing that you might have heard it here first from you? No.
I have no idea. No, there could be anything. Yeah, that's a good thing. Maybe scary stuff. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this question, and I didn't know kind of what the state of thinking within the sector was. But I think having listened to a few of these talks today, there's actually a lot of stuff that's come up that's quite relevant to this thinking. But the idea that, you know, natural history collections should be seen more as active and living resources outside of just those who are researching them. So that kind of, and it's come up a lot today with the illustration, I think is great to have more humanities input into natural sciences collections. So I think that kind of thing is something I would wish to see more of, although it seems like it's already happening. Yes, I kind of wrote that I feel as though natural history museums do have a huge role to play in helping people understand environmental change, but in also making this a tangible thing that's accessible as well. That is one of my wishes, alongside the contracts, obviously.
Well, that's what we'll be going for all of you. Does anyone in the audience have a question? Is someone really working? Sure. Oh, wait.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Okay. Hi. I'm an education officer, so I deal with a lot of very excitable young people coming into the museum every day, which is great. But I know when I was younger, I loved going to museums, but a career in museums was not something I was aware of. I think it's that thing where when kids go to school, they don't realize that like teachers don't just live at the school. And I think it's the same thing with museums. So I suppose my question is, if you could go back and tell your younger self before you decided museums was your thing, one thing to convince you to, you know, pursue a career in museums, what would you tell your younger self?
Oh my God. I would probably say, don't sweat the small stuff. I think, like, I thought you needed like absolutely every single degree in the world to be like a museologist. I thought you needed to know the jargon. I thought you needed to sort of like be that white man with a beard from the 19th century who no longer exists. And I definitely don't fit that margin. I think when I was younger and getting into this, I originally wanted to be a teacher because my interest was bringing education out to kids and moving out of the school space and being this hippie teacher that sits in fields and teaches stuff. And when I wanted to move into museums, I thought it was this really gate-kept community. I thought that museums, you needed to have like 10 years of experience by the time you're 12 and, you know, like already know everything that goes on. And I don't know anything that goes on. I sit in the curatorial department, so a lot of people have been there for a very long time. So I do still feel that way. But I think if I spoke to my younger self, I would just be like, don't worry about it. Just like be yourself, like be your little bubbly self that you always are and you'll figure it out. Like do revise for your GCSEs, but like, yeah, definitely.
Did you want to work in museums when you were little?
No, I wanted to be a marine biologist when I was little. So this is kind of like a full circle moment. I hate the sea. So my mom was like, oh yeah, you like dolphins. And I like adopted a dolphin from WWF and was like, yeah, I don't actually think I don't want to do it anymore. This is expensive. I think it showed up when I was like 20 that I wanted to be in a museum.
I don't know if I really have an answer for that because I always really wanted to work in museums. I was just a big nerd, so I really wanted to do it. So I'd probably go back and tell myself maybe consider a career in investment banking or something, because that might be more financially lucrative. But I don't think I needed convincing. But I think what you said is very apt. I
thought that it would be much more, it is competitive to get jobs, but I thought it would be a less welcoming environment maybe. And I assumed everywhere would be unwelcoming. So I would probably just tell myself that just talk to the people in the museums because they're all really nice, and that's how you get into those things. And you don't have to be, like you said, you don't have to be perfect before you get the job. You don't have to be perfect, but most learning you do in the job anyway, so you don't need to know it yet.
I think for me personally, and I don't know if this, again, is just a feature of my particular schooling context, but I think it was definitely something that my school pushed, that you couldn't really both do humanities and sciences at the same time. And there are a set number of careers that you can do basically when you come out of school. Like you can be an architect or a midwife, or, you know, then go and do English and don't have a job. Actually, I did do an English degree first. So, so I think conservation and then kind of its place within the museums world is great for me because it draws in a lot of those like practical skills, scientific skills. I mean, I personally have quite a strong interest in the kind of materials analysis, characterization side of conservation, and then the kind of artistic skills as well with the color matching. And so really you can have everything at once, which obviously is quite overwhelming with the demands on conservation, but I think is great to give younger people the idea that they can pursue, you know, a number of their interests without having to kind of pick one of them. So yeah.
Okay.
We're going to get back towards that.
Thank you. I was just wondering, you sort of touched on this slightly, but do you think there are enough adequate and accessible pathways into the careers you're in currently, and if not, what needs to change?
I was nodding a lot. No. I think if any career that is, like you said, like a bit of a calling, there's always going to be people who will do the job for less money or less certainty or short contracts or whatever. So it is really hard for any career like that. It's like trying to be an actor. The people who have more privilege in life are probably going to find it easier to get into museums. I would love to see more pathways to make it easier into that kind of stuff. But when the amount of jobs is few and far between, it's automatically it's going to be the people who have more privilege. And I know that directly because I'm from quite a privileged background. Like I went to a private school and I live with my parents and they're happy to have, well, I think they're happy to have me. And I'm in my 30s. So without that, I don't know if I would have been, I don't know, maybe I would have been able to get into museums, but it is one of those unfortunate things that in any job that's competitive, it's harder for people, which is a real shame because, like I was saying earlier, having a really diverse set of skills, backgrounds is so useful. And I'm sure I've experienced that in my museum. I'm sure it's the same in every museum. But I also think one thing is it can be very like opaque on how to get into it and what you need to do first. Like I was saying earlier, there's no like natural history museums studies course unless there is, and I don't know about it. So how you get into it can be a kind of unknown, and that can often be enough to be off-putting or just not be out there. So I'd love to see it be more opaque. I've already seen lots of job adverts where it says you don't have to have a degree, you just have to have equivalent experience and stuff, which is great. But ultimately, who does end up getting those jobs? Yeah, it depends.
That's good. Thank you. Article in Journal of Natural Science Collections by Rachel Jennings a few years ago, which asked employers whether or not they asked for a museum studies degree, and if so, why. And those that did, the number one reason for asking for a museum studies degree was to make it easier to sift the applications, to make it easier to say no to people, rather than any of the experience that has. So I'm gonna put you on the spot before we come to you on that. If there was something other than a museum studies degree that you could take off of a personal specification As in a requirement for a job you could take off thinking, we don't need that, we can get that when we're in, to widen up the pool. Is there something you would take off, anyone? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot, but building on Kane's question.
I don't really have an answer for that. I'm not sure. No, I haven't thought about.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Yeah, I think most of the time it's usually fair enough stuff, but sometimes I have never seen, or maybe I have actually, I've seen jobs that wanted you to have a PhD, which I think is unnecessary. Having like research, if you're a museum professional, having a research experience can be done in a multitude of ways. So having an actual PhD, but I've only ever seen that once, and it was in a very specific scenario. So, but I think that is, yeah. But other than that, I don't have a great answer.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with your last answer. Getting into the museum sector is definitely not accessible to a wide range of people. And to say the same for my background, I'm comfortable saying that I come from a middle class background, but I've still relied on scholarship and luck basically to be in the position that I'm in now. And I know that there were plenty of people who did the first portion, kind of funded their May portion of my course, and then wanted to progress on, and that financial barrier was. So it's not just the availability of the jobs, the short contracts, it's also the expense of training. As you were saying about the kind of requirements on applications looking for a degree, I feel like with the kind of greater demand on conservation to become kind of professionalized and more scientific, as opposed to a few decades ago when it might have been more common to see apprenticeship and skill-based. So I feel as though that kind of shift in how the profession wants to be seen is probably one of the culprits for that, although I'm not aware that conservation has ever been a particularly diverse discipline, and that is probably something that it needs massively.
Any more questions?
Oh, sorry, please. Sorry.
No, I would cry. It's fine. Okay, so no, so I'll answer like both questions kind of, but like no, they're not accessible at all. I think my route into the museum sector was what I think is becoming quite common is people start in front of house or in volunteering, and then they sort of weasel their way in. That's how I describe mine. I weaseled my way into collections management before I got a museum studies degree. And in doing that, you kind of get the sort of like, oh, you haven't taken the traditional route. And then once you're there, you have the very difficult conversations as a racialized person where people look to you to wonder why African, Caribbean, Asian people aren't entering the heritage sector. And you can only really talk for yourself. I can't talk for all of us. So you have to have those very difficult conversations of like, well, what are you doing to introduce us to the heritage sector? Are you doing projects that sort of lower that barrier for entry? So I'm going to keep talking about this archive that I worked at. But there's also like Black Cultural Archives as well that do initiatives to introduce young people to archives, and they look specifically at people from racialized backgrounds to try and get them to like be inspired to join and feel like there is a space for them. But again, that's putting a lot on the shoulders of people who know that this work needs to be done. I think until everyone is ready and willing to do that work, it will remain inaccessible. And then in terms of requirements for applications, I don't think it would be a case of getting rid of something, more so like changing the wording for, so I'm now applying for roles because my contract's about to end as well. I'm applying to a lot of things to do with like anti-racism and anti-colonialism, and there's usually a clause in there that relates to being someone with lived experience of racism and discrimination, and I don't want to bring that up in an application, and it feels a lot like the oppression Olympics when you're applying, and yeah, I think it would be a case of rewording what that means to apply and discuss lived experience in a written application, and then how that feels to then be rejected after being vulnerable in a written document. Yeah, that's it. pretty heavy stuff, but you know, that's what it's like.
Good questions. Thank you. Jim, thanks.
As you're at the beginning of your career, what do you think makes a good manager?
So there,
My manager's in the room. He's looking right at me. I've been really fortunate to have really great managers in museums. Please give me another job. I think one of the biggest things is trust. I think I have been in, not directly, but when I was working in London, I had a different colleague who had a different manager outside of the museum who didn't trust them. And it made it a really hard working relationship because it meant that they couldn't do anything without being constantly observed or scrutinized or judged. And it made learning opportunities really difficult. So I've been really fortunate that I have had Paolo, my manager here, and my previous manager in London have been like given me great training, but then also sent me out into the museum and trusted that I was able to do the job, which is, I think, great for like my ability to like learn on my own and develop, but also confidence. You feel really confident when you're trusted to do a job well. So I think that's the biggest one. And also being like chill when you're a bit late or something like that. And also, I think another thing, and this is maybe more, I was in academia for a little bit, but having someone who cares about not just the job, but also like you as a person. So doesn't expect you to work yourself into the ground or expect you to you know, work under really, really difficult conditions and support you in that kind of, yeah.
Yeah, again, I agree with what you're saying. I feel like trust is a big thing. And I think I've at least, again, my supervisor's in the room, so I've definitely been fortunate enough to have been trusted with, you know, some very high value collection items and not, you know, baselessly, I hope, but it's been a great learning experience as well to be able to try those things myself without, you know, having someone kind of hovering over you expecting you to go wrong, which hasn't been my experience at all. And I can say that, you know, outside the heritage sector, I've had some really poor managers in that sense who've wanted to really kind of nitpick through work and yeah, kind of catch you out, as it were. And it's nice to be in an environment where that doesn't happen. I'm not sure I have much to add on that front. I feel like I've seen both sides of it, and it's kind of hard to put a generic category to what makes someone good or bad. It's I guess good to have good personal relationships with your manager, and yeah, to think you're not going to get in trouble if something does go wrong as well. So somebody you can trust going to.
Yeah, I'll probably say the same, like trust and building a close personal relationship without, you know, going too far with your manager. And I'm quite lucky because mine's not in the room, but I've definitely had like my fair share of really good and bad managers. And I think one thing that I really do value, like especially working with colonial legacies and my own heritage, is space to feel negative emotions. I'm saying really wishy-washy answers, guys. You can stop me if you want, but I think like some of the things that I have dealt with in the past and things that I'm looking at, especially now, even with natural sciences, is quite difficult. And there are times when I've felt angry and upset. And I think what I've really valued from my current manager is the space to feel those emotions and feel that they are still as valid as feeling pride and feeling happy about the work that I'm doing. And yeah, it's something I won't forget. And definitely when I do become a manager in a permanent role, it's something I definitely want to like continue on. I think it's really good to have space to feel angry and to feel upset, and knowing that I do have a manager that allows me to do that in his office is really great. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Thank you, Helen. We are going to end it there, but I think it was clear that it was a good idea to do this 3 years ago. I hope people were listening and remember what we've heard today, because it's incredibly valuable. So I have got some announcements before, some admin. Before we get to that, we have a big thank you, round of applause for Tim Chandler, Tasmin Evans, Iona, Elks. Thank you all. And see you in 50 years, yeah?